Welcome to the Authentic Leader Show podcast. Today's podcast is called 3 Signs That You Are Addressing a Team Member Who May Be in the Wrong Role. It's an episode about simple actions that you can take to address poor performance on your team. Welcome to the Authentic Leader Show. The Authentic Leader Show is the podcast about technology leaders who are crushing the bell curve of team performance and leading high-performing teams. Now, let's just get right into it today because I know that you are frustrated in your leadership, or you're a frustrated leader if you were doing one of these 3 things. First is that you have accepted that all teams, including your team, they'll just always have a bell curve of performance. You know, everything from poor performers up to high performers. I know I certainly felt this way because before I became a manager or a titled leader in that role, the teams that I've been involved in have always had a bell curve, right? I mean, you've always had a few that are just some low performers in the team. You have a few that are kind of the high performers, and then the bulk of the people on the team were kind of middle of the road and pretty decent performers. But it definitely was not skewed high and wasn't skewed low. It just kind of accepted the fact that that teams were kind of this bell curve of performance. So you may be just accepting that as well. And I've learned not to accept that. We're going to talk a little bit about that here today. But number 2, if you're a frustrated leader, is that you have recently fired somebody, or you might be even considering firing yet another performer on your team. You may have, this is something that you're constantly dealing with. And I have some leaders who I've worked with who have definitely dealt with this, where I've just accepted that I'm always going to be firing someone, and I'm always going to be considering firing someone, and people are going to be rolling off and rolling on to the team. And again, I don't think that you have to accept that. That is not what I would call a normal mode of operation, is constantly firing people, refreshing the team, bringing new team members in. There's a certain level of natural attrition that will happen, but to have just this regular churn of always having to fire these poor performers, that's not something you should be having to deal with. And then number 3 is that if you are a frustrated performer, what I find is that you are avoiding assigning work to your poor performer because you just don't have confidence in the work that they do. So there might be work that normally, under normal circumstances, you would give some work to someone on your team that is actually a poor performer, but you're avoiding it. You don't want to give that poor performer team because the work that you're having them do is so important. You can't risk them not doing a very good job of the work that you need to assign to them. So you're just avoiding it. And we'll talk a little bit more about how other ways you might be avoiding giving work to poor performers. But if you're avoiding work, you're probably frustrated in your leadership. And because you are doing these things, what I also know about you is that you're spending a lot of time with your poor performers, trying to make them better performers. But what you find is that you're really just kind of spinning your wheels. You're spending so much time with them, and almost to the detriment, and really to the detriment of the better performers in your team. They're not getting your time, but you are spending a lot of time with your poor performers because you have to, trying to make them a better performer, just not making much progress there. The second thing that I know that you're doing is that you're beginning to accept that, you know what, they just don't get it. And maybe they won't ever get it. But you're just starting to accept it. You're not doing anything about it, or not doing maybe enough about it when you just start accepting it. And then the last thing is that I also know that you're feeling like you are overworking your other team members because they kind of need to pick up the slack for your poor performer. And that's also not fair. Your other team members are not feeling as fair, and whether they're sharing it with you or not, they're probably feeling that way. So if you've been dealing with poor performance on your team for more than just like the last few months, just for more than a few months at all, then I know that you are either not doing an effective job setting your team member up for success. The person that is your poor performer, you're not doing that good job of setting them up for success. Or you have been procrastinating firing them because you're not clear how to fire them really with a clear conscience. You want to make sure that, hey, if I'm firing them, that they deserve to be fired, but you're not totally confident and sure that maybe they do need to be fired. So let's just work through this a little bit, because just so you know, inside of the authentic leader framework, which I talk about all the time, but inside of that, I have what I call these 6 factors to bring your poor performers up to high performers. And when you master all 6 of these factors, you will see huge results in your team's performance, or you will have confidence that you have done all that you can do for this team member, and you may ultimately need to fire them. Now, I don't have time to go into all 6 of these factors, of course. And so I'm going to give you one of the most important ones that I use now. And it's so effective that you can implement it today and you'll begin seeing results even tomorrow. And so I'm about to share with you and show you how to bring poor performers to high performance. And here's the mistake that I find that most technology leaders are making, is that because there is so much to do on the team and there's not much time to do it because you have a time crunch, what they're doing is they're focusing on the short-term solution. And the short-term solution is to simply either do the work themselves rather than assigning it to this poor performer, or giving the work to someone else who they know can do the work. And again, that's just a short-term solution. That's not a long-term solution. And the consequence to this, really the real problem to this, is that of doing this is that your effectiveness as a leader, it really erodes over time, because the team and even others around you, they start to see you avoiding the performance problem, or worse, they see you just accepting poor performance. And when you accept poor performance, you're basically setting the bar and saying, hey, everybody, here's the bar of performance that's acceptable. And whether you know it or not, even your better performers in a team, they'll start to gravitate towards what they know is acceptable performance, rather than being challenged to be the high performer on your team, which of course they deserve and you deserve. Everyone on the team deserves high performance on a team. So I have 6 factors that actually address this inside of the authentic leader framework. And we have them all covered when we talk about that. But I'm going to give you one of the most effective factors because, again, it's one of the most effective. And with this, you'll be able to implement it today and you'll see some results starting as soon as tomorrow. Now, earlier this year, a client of mine, they contacted me because they were about to fire a poor performer on their team. And I told them, or I asked them really, tell me more about why you think that you're ready to fire this person. And this poor performer, they just weren't fully doing their job. The work that they were doing, it was certainly below standards. Many times it was late or it was incomplete, and they simply didn't have the skills to do the job in many cases as well. And I asked this leader, why did they hire this team member in the first place? And because, they must have thought that they could do the job, right? And the bottom line is that they did a poor job, really, of fully assessing the capabilities of this person in this role. And we talk about capabilities, we're talking about not only to mentally do the work, but sometimes it's physically and even emotionally perform the functions of the job. Now, a bright spot in this situation is that the poor performer, they really were initially excited about the role when they were hired, and because they've always wanted to have a job like this. So that's definitely a bright spot. And the really good news is here, because if your team member, if they aren't excited about their role or want to do the work, it can be very hard for a leader to motivate a team member. So, but in this case, they were at least at one point excited about it. So that's good. So together we began to work through what I call the 6 factors of high performance. And inside of the 6 factors is this one part where we really get clear about the resources that are necessary for this role to be successful. And the resources, we're talking about resources that need to be available to them so that they can do their job. And what we found is that in this case, this team member who was the poor performer, they did not have access to all of the resources that they needed. So once we began identifying what resources they didn't have access to, the leader started just simply granting access. In some cases, it was just simple as, oh, you didn't have access to that, didn't realize that. Let's grant you access to that. Or in other cases, they showed the poor performer how to do the work. They didn't maybe know how to access it or where to access it. So just showing, hey, this is where you get the information, you get the data from, this is where you get the resources that you need. And we also discovered that the poor performer, they were unclear about the priorities of all the work that they did inside of the functions of their role. And what we're talking about here is that they knew their role, but they knew it kind of in their bubble, right? And they knew they thought they were clear about what work they needed to do, but they didn't really understand how it fit into the greater work that the rest of the team was also doing. So they didn't understand how the specific functions and the day-to-day things they did fit into how everyone else was working. So the leader worked with this poor performer to really help them to prioritize their work and understand how their functions and their day-to-day operations and actions and tasks that they were doing, how they fit in, and then how to actually prioritize their work based on that. Once you understand kind of the greater picture, it can now become a little easier to prioritize the work. And in some cases, it's, hey, this function has to be done on Monday by 4. They didn't know that or didn't realize that. We kind of sometimes have an assumption as leaders that people should just know that, or they should be able to pick up on that. Well, that's an assumption that you have, and we can get into big trouble when you're making assumptions, I'm sure, as you've heard before. So you just really want to get clear about, how can we help make sure that this team member knows how to and understands how to prioritize the work that they're doing. But the lastly that I'll share here today is that the leader identified that the poor performer didn't have realistic timelines in some cases to do their work. What we're talking about here is that some of the work, the timelines they had to do it, was in some cases arbitrary, right? It didn't really matter, but we're giving this really stringent and tight timeline to get something done when it actually ended up not being enough time for really anyone to do that work, or maybe in their case, getting the work done. So we looked at, of the timelines that needed to be done, we adjusted those appropriately or where they were able to be. And by giving a little bit more time on some projects actually helped to reduce the time that it took to do other ones. So we just got really clear about the amount of time that it takes to do the work and then made sure that those were realistic. So as you can probably guess, because I'm sharing this story with you right now, this team member, they were a poor performer no more, right? It took a little time, certainly. It certainly took some effort. Like I say, many of the things we talk about in leadership, I say is simple. It's not necessarily easy, but it is easy if you can just take one piece at a time. We break it down to smaller pieces and just start addressing them one at a time. And over time, you start peeling away that onion, and they start getting better and better, and they start to increase their performance. And now it wasn't just that these 3 actions that this leader took turned this team member around. What we did is we fully implemented all 6 of the factors of high performance that I mentioned earlier. And ultimately, we turned this poor performer around to be one of the highest performers on the team. Now, as a matter of fact, one of my clients actually said in some of the exercises that we did when we went through this program is that this is an exact quote, actually, that one of my clients said. They said, the exercise helped me to better understand where my team is in their performance and how I can more effectively lead them as individuals. Now that's the goal, right? There is no cookie cutter answer for this is the way to lead all people. Everybody's different. The fact you have people on your team means that everyone needs to be led differently. And you have to find, where do you meet them based on their needs and their criteria? In this case, this leader felt that they did a better job understanding kind of where are they right now, because everyone's at a different point in their performance, but also in how to adjust your leadership to lead them again as individuals. So of course, that's the goal. Now let's keep this real, okay? I don't want to create this fantasy land that this always happens and this always works out, because after implementing all 6 of these factors, you may in fact still need to hire, you may in fact actually still need to fire this poor performer. But if you do this in time, you will have ultimately the confidence that you have truly done all that you can do to set your poor performer up for success. And again, that is the name of the game. And that is part of your job as the leader of your team, is to set your team up for success if they're capable of. And you want to have that confidence. So these 6 factors will give you that confidence. So let me ask you this. Can you relate to this story? Have you been in a situation like this before? Are you frustrated with poor performers on your team? Are you right now considering firing a poor performer on your team? If you answered yes to any of those things, I would love to talk with you in a free strategy call. And together we will determine if you have done all that you can do to set your team member up for success. And if not, we can quickly identify even just 1 or 2 things that you can do right after our call to begin implementing and start your poor performer on your team on the path towards success, hopefully. But you'll again have that confidence if they can do it. If you're interested in this free strategy call, you can just go to AuthenticSuccessOnline.com, and on that first page, click on the button that says free strategy call so we can discuss your situation today. You can follow us on Facebook by going to @AuthenticLeaderNow. You can also find more information at ChristopherRJones.com or AuthenticSuccessOnline.com. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today. Please come back for another episode.